What are we discussing on today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast? Silver linings and positive takeaways from the 2024 season for the Dbacks. And I have some playoff takes I need to get off my chest as we head into another weekend of baseball.
You are Locked on Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. You're listening to who? Always charismatic host of this podcast, Millard Thomas, multimedia journalist and a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millardthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there, you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. This episode is brought to you by Booking.com. Booking.yeah. The right stay can make you a fan of any city, even your baseball rivals. Book today on Booking.com, the official accommodation partner of Major League Baseball. Get the Booking.com app today. On today's Locked on Diamondbacks podcast, we'll talk about silver linings and positive takeaways that we should have from the D-back season, despite them missing the playoffs. And then speaking of playoffs, I got some postseason takes that I want to get off my chest before the weekend slate of games. So we'll talk about all that on today's podcast. But first, I want to say thank you for making Locked on Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free. It's available on all platforms. So please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube. Please hit subscribe to Locked on Diamondbacks on YouTube. All right. Let's get back into the Locked on Diamondbacks podcast and let's talk about silver linings and positive takeaways from the D-backs 2024 season. I have 8 things written down here. I'll do 4 and 4, split it up evenly. The first thing on my list is something that we've talked about yesterday on the podcast. So I just want to reiterate the point. First, big silver lining and positive takeaway from the 2024 season for the D-backs. Again, Ketel Marte has reestablished himself as the best second baseman in the sport. Ketel Marte, great season 2023, a big bounce back after a 2022 season where he really struggled, a campaign unlike anything we've really seen in his career outside of maybe the 2020 season, which was obviously weird for so many reasons. Like, we knew Ketel was a stud, but he hadn't yet put a full campaign together from start to finish since 2019, where he was able to showcase his abilities. And this season, best season of Ketel Marte's career, arguably. I mean, 2019, he still had a 329 average and a higher OPS at 981. So you can still make the argument 2019 was higher, but in 2024, more home runs than in 2019, more RBIs than 2019. And I think the fear level for opposing pitchers, same. I think Ketel Marte, also when comparing his game this year to the rest of the players at his position, night and day. You go at WRC plus, Marte 151. Next closest guy was Jose Altuve, but you look at the stats for Altuve, good numbers, a 2020 season, a 295 average, but a sub 800 OPS, 16 less home runs than Marte, 30 less RBIs despite playing 20 more games. Like, and that was the second best offensive player. Like, Marte ran away with the award for being the best second baseman in the sport this year. So it's very nice to see Marte reestablish himself as the best player at his position. The number 2 positive takeaway I had from this season, we all love Jordan Lawler, but Geraldo Perdomo can definitely be the shortstop of the future. I'm still Team Lawler. I still want to see him get promoted and have a future with the D-backs and see if we could develop him into another up-and-coming infielder, potential superstar, if everything hits with Jordan Lawler. But if it doesn't, if we want to use Jordan Lawler as a trade piece or a trade chip, like, that's fine for the D-backs because a guy in Geraldo Perdomo has proven himself to be a legit starting shortstop in Major League Baseball after coming off an all-star appearance last year at age 23. there might have been some concern as to whether or not it was a fluky type season. Like he was really good in the first half, slowed down in the second half. His numbers went down a little bit toward the end of the year. So how realistic is the ceiling and expectations they could put on a Geraldo Perdomo? Like, can we believe in an all-star appearance for Perdomo? Like, is that the trajectory of what his ceiling is? I think what he showed this season, maybe he's not an all-star level player. I think he could definitely make another all-star in his future, but whether or not he makes another all-star team, I think is moot. I think what Perdomo proved this season is that he's a legit starting shortstop. And if the D-backs want to move on or move off of Jordan Lawler as a trade chip, or if Lawler doesn't work out, like Domo can be the shortstop for the next 10 years. He's got a quality bat, great plate discipline, plays good defense, solid base runner, great in terms of creating chaos and playing small ball. Like Perdomo, just one of those glue guys everyone needs in the bottom of their lineup and on their roster. So Domo can be the D-back shortstop for the next decade if they need to. And also considering guys like Nick Ahmed was the D-back shortstop for so long, Domo is a way better player than Nick Ahmed. Defensively, maybe Ahmed is better, but I think Domo's bat way, way higher upside than a Nick Ahmed. And I don't even think we've seen the best of Domo's bat just yet. So I'm definitely feeling good about Geraldo's Perdomo's future with the D-backs right now. Third silver lining from this season, we finally have ourselves a third baseman. The D-backs haven't really had too many good third basemen during my time covering this podcast, or even like the last 10 years. I mean, you've had Jake Lamb and the one or two good seasons he had. Eduardo Escobar had like a season and a half of good baseball with the D-backs. And so it's a lot of short-term pieces. Like, I don't want to disrespect Eduardo because he was good for Arizona, especially when he first came over in that 2019 season. Like he had a pretty monster year. Maybe I don't feel like it was as impactful because those D-backs teams were just not very good that Eduardo Escobar played for. And so it's been a minute, but the D-backs finally have themselves a third baseman once again because Erod was traded during the 2021 season and he was pretty solid that year, had the 22 home runs in the first half for the D-backs. I think he was an all-star that season for the D-backs as well in 2021. So it's been like 3 seasons since the D-backs have had a decent to good third baseman, right? We've seen Jace Peterson, we've seen Evan Longoria, Emmanuel Rivera. Like it's been kind of a revolving door the last few seasons since Eduardo Escobar's departure. And now the D-backs have themselves a pretty good piece in Eugenio Suarez, who, again, as I like to say on the podcast, for 80 games there, was comparable to Babe Ruth. And so D-backs definitely going to pick up his player option for next season. And he should come back as a power hitting guy, driving in clutch RBIs and playing solid defense at third base. I like Eugenio a lot, and it's good to know we have a solid piece over there at third. And then the final silver lining I want to discuss in segment number 1. Jake McCarthy is a dude. There was question marks about Jake McCarthy as a player. He had that great 2022 season where he played 99 games, finished fourth in Rookie of the Year voting, kind of had a breakout year, not really on a ton of people's radar in 2022. So there were some expectations on him entering last season where it's like, okay, can he build off what he had in 2022? Can he improve? And instead, he went backwards, went up and down between the majors and minor leagues as they tried to refine his swing and approach. And Jake McCarthy ended up not having a good 2023 campaign. A lot of pressure on him this year. He really needed to come through against the left-handed pitching if he wanted playing time, and he did exactly that. Ended the season with a 285 average. The OPS could have been a little bit higher. He actually ended up with a lower OPS than what he had in 2022, but Jake McCarthy for about 2 months there carried this D-backs offense. I think proved himself like Geraldo Perdomo. He is a legit major league player. Maybe it varies. Maybe there's more variance in their game where they have weeks and stretches where they look like all-stars and weeks and stretches where they struggle. Like we've seen McCarthy this season where he had a couple months where he looked like a superstar, and then the final month of the season, September, he looked like a guy who probably should be on the bench a little bit more. But I think at the end of the day, Perdomo and Jake McCarthy proved this season that those are two legit major leaguers in baseball, and they should be around the organization for a long, long time. And now we'll talk about some more silver linings in segment number two. But hey, if you're looking to book an upcoming trip during this MLB postseason, then the place you're going to want to go to do that, of course, is going to be Booking.com. Booking. Yeah. Explore those US cities you always secretly want to learn more about with hotels, bed and breakfast, vacation rentals, resorts, and so much more on Booking.com. You might just find your perfect stay even in your baseball rival city during the postseason. No matter what team you're rooting for this postseason, use Booking.com to get your accommodations from hotels that look over stadiums to family friendly resorts. Booking.com has everything you need. The right stay can make you a fan of any US city, even your baseball rivals. I know because I used Booking.com earlier this year when I went to San Diego to catch a Dbacks versus Padres game, and they hooked me up. So if you want them to hook you up, check out Booking.com. Booking. Yeah. All right. Let's get back to the Lockdown Diamondbacks podcast and let's talk about some more silver linings from the 2024 season for the D-backs. This next one, Pavin Smith turning himself into a little bit of a trade chip. Pavin Smith, friend of the pod. I have major respect for Pavin Smith, but as a Major League Baseball player, I just don't see it long term. His bat, I just don't think is good enough. Despite the breakout he had this year, long term, I don't think his bat is good enough. I don't know if I trust the power surge he showed this year. Defensively, there's still not a spot for him. Athletically, he's below average, doesn't really have a strong arm. I think at the end of the day, his still profile as a player projects to be below league average. And so for Pavin Smith, the kind of season he just had was absolutely perfect. You played 60 games, a 2020 COVID shortened season sample size. And in that sample size, 900 OPS, 9 home runs, 36 RBIs. You looked really good, displayed a ton of power, played a ton in the outfield. And maybe Pavin Smith did just enough to turn himself into a trade chip where maybe the D-backs can sell high on his value and flip him for maybe at least just like a reliever, like a fifth or sixth guy in the bullpen. If you could just get that, or maybe like an intriguing young pitcher, like another Christian Mena type guy they could throw into your farm system that might not be too far away from making an appearance on the major league level. I think that would be perfect for this D-backs organization. Like Pavin Smith, the person, a lot as a player, I'm not sure I'm buying stock because of the season he had in 2024. Despite it being really, really productive, I still don't believe in the player that Pavin Smith can be. And so because of it, I would rather sell high on his value right now. Number two, we got ourselves a closer of the future. Justin Martinez is that guy. I know it felt like there's still a contingency of D-backs fans that still weren't sold on Justin Martinez. Guys, I don't know what more Justin Martinez needs to do for you guys to prove that he should be the closer this past season, and he needs to be the closer going forward, especially with Paul Sewald as a pending free agent. I mean, Martinez was fantastic this season. 2.48 ERA if you just want the simple stats. 11 strikeouts per 9 innings. And again, he has one of the nastiest pitching arsenals in Major League Baseball. He throws a sinker 100 miles an hour on average, a fastball 100 miles per hour on average, split finger unhittable, slider unhittable. Like this guy is dominant. His sinker, which was his most thrown pitch this season, he needs to work on that one. 325 average allowed on that, 393 slugging. The slugging is fine, but gave up a lot of hits on that sinker. But his off speed and breaking stuff, split finger 98, 0.098 batting average allowed, and on his slider 0.178 batting average allowed. Even his fastball 217 batting average allowed. So if he can figure that sinker out, watch out for Justin Martinez because he already had himself a great season, but there's still a couple of things he needs to work on from like a location precision standpoint because a 1.3 whip, 4.5 walks per nine, that stuff still isn't too good. But we definitely are all in on the Justin Martinez bandwagon when talking about the D-backs closer of the future. How about this one? Just like Jake McCarthy, Ryan Nelson proved himself to be a dude. And I think everyone was off of Ryan Nelson after the 2023 season he had where he was horrendous. Again, Ryan Nelson pitched a ton last season. He was like third on the team in innings pitched, 144 innings pitched last year, 150 innings pitched this year. I actually have to go do the math. I bet you if you just take the last two seasons, Ryan Nelson probably has the most innings pitched on this D-backs team over the last 2 years combined. That just off the top of my head, I don't know if that's a fact. Zach Gallen still might lead it, but if it's not Zach Gallen, it's probably Ryan Nelson as either one or number two in that scenario. But either way, Ryan Nelson broke onto the scene in 2022. I liked him a lot that season. Small sample size, only 3 starts, but I thought he looked really good. But we all knew this was a guy who was super fastball dependent and need to work on some secondary and tertiary stuff if he really wanted to evolve as a pitcher. 2023, he did not do that at all. But I think this season, he definitely worked on some of his non fastball pitches a lot. I think some of that was way improved. I think more than anything, instead of that secondary stuff, I think honestly his fastball was more than anything improved. I thought he was great in terms of the location of his fastball. The velo was up almost a tick on the fastball. Like, I know we want him to work on the changeup and the slider, but I think it was actually the fastball that was more improved this year than his other stuff because we actually look at the numbers 308 average allowed on the fastball last season, but only 249 average allowed on the fastball this season. Meanwhile, still over a 300 average allowed on the cutter both this season and last year. And then the changeup, actually a 302 average allowed on the changeup this season as well. That's up 100 points from last year. So if you're actually talking about the numbers, it's the fastball that improved this year for Ryan Nelson, not his changeup. And the fastball was always his go-to pitch. And so everyone has wanted Ryan Nelson to work on his secondary stuff and improve that. Well, for Ryan Nelson this season, he just actually doubled down on what he was already good at and improved that area. So I don't mind him being fastball dependent if you're going to be elite with your fastball. And then the final silver lining I want to talk about before I get into some playoff takes in segment number 3, organizational depth. This was, I think, maybe the biggest silver lining or the biggest overall takeaway from this D-back season. The depth in the organization, very good. And it was, I mean, the major reason why the D-backs led the league in runs scored and was even able to put themselves in position for a playoff. Because if you think about the D-backs injuries this year, if we just go up and down, we lost Moreno extended period of time, Walker a long time, Marte a long time, Perdomo a long time, Gurriel missed some games. We lost Jordan Montgomery for a while, Erod for a while, Zach Gallen for a while, Merrill Kelly for a while, Ryan Nelson for a little bit, Paul Sewald for a little bit. Like so many dudes up and down this roster. You know how the D-backs were able to combat that with their great organizational depth. When you had a guy like Lourdes Gurriel go down, you had Jake McCarthy step up, or you had Randall Grichuk step up. You had a Kevin Newman off the bench who was really solid this year. And even if you look at the bullpen, guys like Justin Martinez, who we didn't know breakout season was really good. Guys like Bryce Jarvis was really important as well. And then even deeper than that, when you're talking about Adrian Del Castillo coming up for a couple weeks stretch and really helping out this D-backs team as well, right? Gilbert Diaz and Blake Walston earlier this season were really important to what the D-backs are trying to do as well. Like there were so many random guys throughout this year that had an appearance or two and helped the D-backs win some games. I think that organizational depth, having good players at so many different positions and having good players behind your good players was so important to what the D-backs did this season in terms of their success. And so when I'm talking about the silver linings for the D-backs this season, despite them missing the postseason, what I'm going to remember, the Marte being the best second baseman again, Perdomo establishing himself as a real guy if he needs to be the shortstop of the future, us having a good third baseman again, Jake McCarthy being a dude, Pavin Smith being a trade chip, getting ourselves a closer of the future, Ryan Nelson also being a dude, and then seeing the depth in this D-backs organization. those are some silver linings I had from the 2024 season. But now I need to get some playoff takes off my chest in segment number three. Hey, it's off season time for the D-backs, which means now it's time to get in shape. And the best piece of equipment that I'm using right now is my little tonal, because tonal is the world's smartest and most effective strength training system that helps you get stronger, powered by AI. Tonal learns with every rep so you can deliver workouts personalized just for you. It's like having a personal trainer at home with you, as tonal will optimize every workout just for you. Unlike traditional gym equipment, Tonal uses adaptive digital weight to advance your training techniques. From professional athletes to the Mama 3, Tonal is trusted by thousands who have become their strongest. Right now, Tonal is offering our listeners $200 off your Tonal purchase or promo code LOCKEDONMLB. That's tonal.com, and use promo code LOCKEDONMLB for $200 off your purchase. That's tonal.com, promo code Locked On MLB for $200 off. All right. Let's get back to the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, and let me get off some playoff takes that I have based off the games that we already seen, and some takes that I have as we enter the next series of games. The first take that I have based off the postseason and what I've seen this season, the Tigers could be this year's D-backs team. And what do I mean by that? The Tigers are getting hot at the right time. Now, the Tigers did get hot in September, which was also the right time. They're hot in the postseason and they got hot in September. The D-backs last year were not hot in the final month. They beat the teams that they needed to beat, but for the most part, they backed into the playoffs. But once the playoffs started, they got hot at the right time. So that's the first point. Second point, the second point, a couple of studs on the roster when looking at both teams, but mostly for the casual fan, it's a lot of people that the casual baseball fan doesn't know. When looking at the D-backs last year, you might have known who Ketel, Marte, who Zach Gallen is, but to be honest, a lot of guys weren't up on the Merrill Kelly game. Like, a lot of people didn't know how good Merrill Kelly was last season and how good he's been the last few seasons. And I think for a lot of people, they're kind of having that realization with the Tigers with some of their players. Like, even a guy who's going to win the Cy Young this season, Tariq Skubal. I don't think a lot of people even know who that is, and he's been a stud this year for the Detroit Tigers. Riley Green, a very nice and up and coming player. Like, they do have a couple of studs on their roster that some people might know, but for the most part, the casual baseball fan won't know most people on the Detroit Tigers roster, just like the D-backs team last season. And then the final comparison between those two teams is just how the playoffs have started for them. A mix in the first two rounds of historically great teams and winnable series for both of the teams in question here in the D-backs and Tigers. Because what I say by historical and winnable series, the D-backs last year beat the Milwaukee Brewers, winnable series, and then took down the LA Dodgers, historically great team. And then took down the LA Dodgers, historically great team. The Detroit Tigers this year, they just beat the Houston Astros. That's a historically great team. Now they got a winnable series against the Cleveland Guardians. And so I think through the first two series, it's at least stacked up really well to where it's very comparable between the D-backs run and the Tigers run. And then if you want to go a step further, the D-backs in the NLCS faced the NL East team. Well, the Tigers potentially could face an AL East team in the New York Yankees if they get there in the ALCS. And so I think these two teams are very similar, and I would not be surprised actually if the Tigers get to the World Series, because I think they could be this year's D-backs. The second take I have, sorry for having any level of faith in the Baltimore Orioles. I know the Orioles were struggling post All-Star break, but I thought they would have picked it up a little bit once the postseason started. I thought they were just hitting a little bit of a wall, but I thought they would have gotten going once again once those playoff lights came on. I didn't think they were just going to no-show the postseason, and that's what they did. And so my take is the Baltimore Orioles are the East Coast Milwaukee Brewers, and that just means they're regular season teams who don't get past the divisional round, and we'll see if Milwaukee could do that. And we know Baltimore can't do that. And so until Baltimore does that, They are right now just a regular season team to me where you could win 100 games in the regular season, finish with the best record, and I would not care. I would still pick the other team against you just because you have not proven anything to me in a very, very long time. Third take I have from this postseason: if the Yankees don't make it to the World Series, they should be regulated. Regulated? Yeah, that's the right word. Usually you do regulation for like the worst team in like a soccer league, right? Usually those teams get regulated to the minor leagues. And so for the New York Yankees, based off their historical standards of championship or bust, when you look at their current path of getting back to a World Series, like it's either what, Kansas City, Detroit, or Cleveland, like young, inexperienced teams who on paper do not have the talent that the Yankees do. Like, if you do not make it to the World Series this year, New York Yankees, you should be regulated to the minors. Like, it would be a travesty. It would be an embarrassment by Yankee standards. Most teams, it would not be this big of a deal if they didn't make it to the World Series. But for the New York Yankees, who their one goal every single season is to get to the World Series, for the New York Yankees, who have not been there since 2009, for the New York Yankees, who you look at the field and it's the Detroit Tigers, who no one believes they're in the postseason. Again, go look at their roster. Not a ton of talent, despite them playing perfect baseball at the right time. You got the Kansas City Royals, who, again, just way too young, way too inexperienced. You like Bobby Witt, you like Salvador Perez, but can you really see a rotation of Cole Ragans, Seth Lugo, and like Brady Singer going deep into the postseason? I don't know. And then after that, got like the Cleveland Guardians, another one of those young, inexperienced teams. Like, if you're the New York Yankees, if it's not your time now, I don't know if it's ever going to be your time. So the Yankees, it's always a World Series or bust, but it feels emphasized this season, especially with no Houston Astros in your way. Next take: whoever wins the Mets versus Brewers series is a win-win for me personally. This is more of a personal take I have, because either the Mets go home, which means both the teams from the doubleheader on Monday would be out the postseason, which would feel great as a D-backs fan, knowing all three of those teams who are on the cusp are out of the playoffs after 1 week, or Milwaukee is out because for some reason I've taken on the mantle of hate watching them. I don't know why. I don't know how it started, but here we are. And so either way, whoever loses, it's a win-win for me. And then whoever wins, they're going to get smoked in the next round by Philadelphia, which is their ceiling, the divisional round for both of those teams, the Mets and Milwaukee. And so I'm feeling good no matter who wins that series, because I know next round they're going to get smoked by Philly. Then the final take I have from this postseason: no more crying from Braves fans because you got the wild card round, you didn't get a bye, and the results were the same. I know there wasn't a Chris Sale, and I will say that's a big factor, but you still had Max Fried, your other stud ace, go in game number 2, and he was not very good. And so if you're Atlanta, no more crying. No more whining. I don't want to hear about, oh my God, we got to buy and we got smoked. No, don't talk about the regular season, how it should be changed. Only I could talk about that, because I do believe the regular season needs to be shorter. I do believe there's not much value on playing 162 games, but Atlanta Braves can't make that argument right now because they were trying to make the argument after last season and we did not want to hear it. And so this season just validated that, you know what, Atlanta, maybe you're not as good as you think you are. Now that's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back tomorrow for more, not tomorrow, come back next week for more Diamondbacks news coverage and insight. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.